Emma's world collapsed as her beloved mare died giving birth during the violent storm, leaving her alone with a fragile orphaned foal fighting for its first breath. Little did she know this traumatic night would spark a battle for the foal's future that would tear Meadowbrook apart before ultimately bringing the town together in ways no one could have imagined. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The storm arrived without warning, transforming the peaceful summer evening into a chaotic symphony of wind and rain. Thunder rolled across the hills of Meadowbrook, a small farming community where everyone knew each other's names and hardships. The sudden shift in weather sent farmers scrambling to secure their properties, bringing livestock to shelter and battening down anything that might blow away in the gale. At Willow Creek Farm, Emma Harrison raced through the pelting rain toward the stables. Her soaked clothes clung to her skin as lightning illuminated the darkened landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. The wind howled through the trees, bending them at unnatural angles as if nature itself was in pain. But Emma's thoughts were fixed on one thing only: Bella, her prized chestnut mare, 9 days overdue to foal. "Please be okay," Emma whispered, her words torn away by the wind as she pushed open the heavy stable door. Inside, the familiar scents of hay and horses usually brought Emma comfort, but tonight they mixed with something else, a tension in the air that made her heart race. The horses whinnied nervously in their stalls, disturbed by the storm's fury. Emma moved quickly past them, her flashlight beam bouncing with each hurried step until it landed on Bella's stall at the far end. The mare was down. "Oh no, Bella," Emma called out, rushing forward. The beautiful chestnut mare lay on her side, her flanks heaving with labored breaths. Even in the dim light, Emma could see the sweat glistening on Bella's coat, the whites of her eyes showing in pain and fear. Emma's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed. "Dr. Miller, it's Emma Harrison. Bella's in labor, and something's wrong. The storm... I can't... Please, we need you." The connection crackled with static, the veterinarian's voice breaking through in fragments. "Try to get there. Roads flooding. Do what you can. Talking you through." Another crash of thunder shook the stable and the call dropped. Emma fought back tears as she knelt beside Bella, stroking her neck. "It's okay, girl. We've done this before, remember? With Starlight and Midnight. We can do this together." But this was different. Emma could tell by the way Bella's eyes rolled back, by the unnatural rhythm of her contractions. This wasn't like the other foalings Emma had assisted with over her 15 years of breeding horses. Something was terribly wrong. Through the next hour, Emma worked desperately, her hands moving with practiced skill despite her fear. Outside, the storm raged unabated, as if determined to tear the world apart. Inside, a different storm unfolded as Bella fought to bring new life into the world while her own slipped away. "Push, Bella, push," Emma encouraged, tears mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. The mare gathered her strength for one final effort, and suddenly, amid the chaos of the storm, the foal emerged. Spindly legs, wet coat, and impossibly fragile in the harsh world it had just entered. Emma moved quickly, clearing the newborn's airways, making sure it could breathe. It was a colt, she noticed, a beautiful chestnut like his mother, with a perfect white star on his forehead. But her momentary joy evaporated as she turned back to Bella. The mare's breathing had grown shallow, her once bright eyes now dulling. "No, Bella, stay with me," Emma pleaded, her voice breaking. She'd raised Bella from a filly, nursed her through injuries, celebrated her victories. The mare wasn't just livestock, she was family. Another flash of lightning illuminated the stable, casting harsh shadows across Bella's struggling form. In that brief electric moment, Emma saw the blood pooling beneath the mare. Too much blood. Internal bleeding, she realized with sinking horror. Something had torn during the difficult birth. Emma reached for her phone again, desperately trying Dr. Miller once more, but the storm had knocked out the cell service. She was alone with a dying mare and a newborn foal who hadn't even stood for the first time. "Emma," a voice called from the stable entrance. Through her tears, Emma looked up to see Jack, her nearest neighbor, silhouetted against another lightning flash. He rushed toward her, taking in the scene with the experienced eye of a third-generation farmer. "The roads are washing out," he said grimly, kneeling beside her. "Miller can't get through. I tried to call you, but—" He stopped, seeing the devastation in her eyes. "What can I do?" "Help me save her," Emma whispered, though she already knew it was too late. Together they did everything they could, working with the limited supplies in Emma's emergency kit. But with each passing minute, Bella's breathing grew more labored, her pulse weaker under Emma's trembling fingers. The newborn foal, sensing his mother's distress, made his first attempts to rise on wobbly legs. He fell, tried again, fell once more. On the third attempt, he managed to stand, swaying precariously like a sapling in the storm. Emma watched through tears as he took his first uncertain steps toward his mother. "At least she got to see him stand," Jack said softly, placing a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. Bella's eyes followed her foal, a final maternal instinct overriding her pain. She nickered softly, a sound so full of love it broke Emma's heart anew. The foal responded, moving closer to nuzzle his mother's face. For a brief, perfect moment they connected, mother and son, meeting and parting in the same stormy night. Then, as if she'd been holding on just for this moment, Bella exhaled one last time. Her body, which had carried champions and weathered countless seasons, grew still beneath Emma's hands. "No," Emma sobbed, burying her face in the mare's neck. "Please, no." The storm outside seemed to pause, as if nature itself was acknowledging the passing of one of its own. In that strange moment of quiet, the newborn foal stood beside his mother's body, confused and alone in a world he had just entered. Jack moved first, gently pulling Emma away. "The foal needs you now," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. "Bella gave everything to bring him here. Don't let it be for nothing." Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, looking at the wobbly-legged colt who watched her with trust in his eyes, eyes that looked so much like his mother's. In that moment, something shifted inside her. Grief remained, a boulder in her chest, but alongside it grew a fierce determination. "I'll call him Storm," she said, reaching out to the foal who cautiously approached her outstretched hand, "because he was born in darkness but will grow in light." Jack nodded, understanding the weight of the promise in her words. As the storm began to abate outside, a different kind of storm was just beginning, one that would eventually sweep through their entire community, starting with a foal who lost his mother and a woman who found unexpected purpose in the darkest of nights. Neither Emma nor Jack could have known then how much this night would change everything, not just for them, but for the entire town of Meadowbrook. Dawn broke reluctantly over Meadowbrook, the sun struggling to pierce clouds still heavy with the previous night's storm. The landscape bore witness to nature's fury, fences down, fields flooded, tree branches scattered like discarded toys. At Willow Creek Farm, Emma hadn't slept. Her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, tracked the newborn foal's every movement as he explored his small corner of the world on unsteady legs. Jack had stayed through the night, helping Emma move Bella's body, a task that had nearly broken her all over again, and setting up a makeshift nursery for Storm in a separate stall. Before leaving to check on his own property, he'd promised to return with supplies and to spread word to the neighbors. "You need to sleep," he'd told her gently. "I can't," she'd replied, her gaze never leaving the foal. "If I close my eyes, I might lose him too." Now, as morning light filtered through the stable windows, Emma mixed another batch of milk replacer. The formula wasn't ideal. Nothing could replace a mother's milk, but it was Storm's only chance at survival. Her hands moved mechanically, measuring powder and warm water with precision born from years of experience, though never with a situation this dire. "Here you go, little one," she murmured, approaching Storm with the bottle. The foal eyed her warily, still confused by this strange human who wasn't his mother. His instincts told him to search for an udder, not accept this rubber substitute. Emma persisted, gently guiding the nipple to his mouth. After several frustrated attempts, Storm finally latched on, sucking hungrily once he realized this odd object contained nourishment. Emma exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. This small victory, getting Storm to take the bottle, felt momentous in the wake of last night's devastating loss. As the foal drank, she ran her free hand along his back, feeling his delicate frame beneath her palm. "You're a fighter," she told him, "just like your mother." The thought of Bella brought fresh tears, but Emma blinked them back. There would be time for grief later. Right now, Storm needed her focus, her strength, her unwavering attention. A newborn foal required feeding every 2 hours, constant monitoring, and careful handling to ensure proper development. Without his mother to teach him, Storm would rely entirely on human guidance to learn how to be a horse. Outside the stable, the sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of Jack's truck. He wasn't alone. Dr. Miller climbed out of the passenger side, medical bag in hand, her face etched with apology and concern. "Emma, I'm so sorry," the veterinarian said as she entered the stable. The bridge was completely underwater. There was no way through until this morning. Emma nodded numbly. "I understand. It's not your fault." Dr. Miller moved with professional efficiency, examining Storm thoroughly while Jack unloaded supplies from his truck: formula, blankets, electrolytes, and a cooler of prepared meals from his wife, Sarah. The community was already rallying even before most of them knew what had happened. "He's underweight but otherwise healthy," Dr. Miller announced after completing her examination. "His breathing is good, heart strong. He's lucky you were here, Emma. Without immediate care, orphan foals rarely survive their first night." The words were meant to comfort, to acknowledge Emma's efforts, but they landed like stones in her stomach. Lucky wasn't how she would describe any of this. "What about his development?" Emma asked, pushing away thoughts of what might have happened if she hadn't made it to the stable in time. Without Bella to guide him, Dr. Miller's expression softened. "It's a challenge, no doubt. Foals learn critical behaviors from their mothers and herd mates: socialization, appropriate fear responses, grazing behavior, all typically taught in those first crucial months." "But it can be done," Emma pressed. "Yes, with dedicated care and proper socialization with other horses when he's ready." Dr. Miller packed her instruments back into her bag. "The most immediate concern is establishing a consistent feeding schedule and monitoring for any signs of illness. Orphaned foals are particularly vulnerable to infection." As Dr. Miller gave detailed instructions, Jack stepped outside to make some calls. Emma could hear his voice, low and serious, explaining the situation to someone on the other end. More help was coming, she realized, whether she asked for it or not. By midday, the news of Bella's death and Storm's birth had spread throughout Meadowbrook. In a farming community where livelihoods depended on cooperation and mutual support, no tragedy remained isolated for long. Emma's phone began ringing with offers of help, condolences, and practical advice from other horse owners. Maya Wilson, who ran the local feed store, arrived with specialized foal milk replacer and a schedule of volunteers willing to take night shifts. Old Pete, a retired jockey who now gave riding lessons to Meadowbrook's children, brought a small stuffed horse. "Foals need companionship," he explained gruffly, avoiding Emma's surprised gaze. Something to cuddle with when they're lonely. Helps them sleep. Emma accepted the toy, touched by the thoughtfulness behind such a simple gift. She placed it in Storm's stall, and to her amazement, the foal immediately approached it, sniffing curiously before lying down beside it. Throughout the afternoon, more visitors arrived, not so many as to overwhelm, but a steady stream of support that showed Emma she wasn't alone in this unexpected challenge. Sarah, Jack's wife, took charge of the house, stocking the refrigerator and making sure Emma ate something substantial. The Mitchell twins, barely 16 but already experienced with their family's breeding operation, offered to handle the evening feeding so Emma could rest. As dusk settled over the farm, Emma found herself sitting on a hay bale outside Storm's stall, watching as the foal finally slept, his small body curled around the stuffed horse. Jack sat beside her in companionable silence, both of them exhausted but unwilling to leave Storm alone just yet. "The whole town's talking about him," Jack said finally. "About you too." Emma glanced at him questioningly. "They're calling him the miracle foal," Jack explained. "Born in the worst storm we've had in years, mother gone, but still fighting to live. People around here appreciate that kind of spirit." "He shouldn't have to fight so hard," Emma said softly. "He should be with Bella, learning from her, protected by her." Jack nodded, understanding the weight of what couldn't be changed. "But he has you instead, and now it seems he has all of Meadowbrook behind him too." As if sensing he was being discussed, Storm stirred in his sleep, tiny legs twitching as he dreamed of running perhaps, something he'd never seen his mother do, but somehow knew in his bones was what horses were meant for. "Get some sleep, Emma," Jack said, standing up. "The Mitchell boys will be here in an hour. I'll stay until then." Too exhausted to argue, Emma nodded. As she walked toward the house, she turned back for one last look at the stable. Through the open door, she could see Jack settling onto the hay bale, his watchful gaze fixed on the sleeping foal. In the midst of loss, something new was taking shape. Not just a foal finding his way without his mother, but a community coming together around a symbol of perseverance and hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small victories. Storm grew stronger daily, his spindly legs becoming more coordinated, his curious eyes taking in the world around him with increasing awareness. Emma's life revolved entirely around his care, the 2-hour feeding intervals gradually extending as he thrived, the constant monitoring for any signs of illness, the gentle handling that would shape his future temperament. What Emma hadn't expected was how the entire town would embrace Storm's journey. The volunteer schedule Maya had organized never had a gap. Someone was always available to help with feedings, or simply sit with the foal so Emma could shower or catch a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. Children asked their parents to drive by Willow Creek Farm after school, hoping for a glimpse of the miracle foal everyone was talking about. Some left drawings, childish renderings of horses with misshapen legs and oversized heads, which Emma dutifully taped to the stable wall. On this particular morning, Emma sat cross-legged in Storm's stall, watching as he investigated a colorful ball Lily Henderson from the elementary school had brought him. The toy was designed for dogs, but Storm found it fascinating, nudging it with his nose and startling when it rolled away, only to approach it again with renewed curiosity. "He's quite the little explorer," said Jack, leaning against the stall door. He'd taken to stopping by every morning before heading to his own farm, often bringing coffee and fresh pastries from the Meadowbrook bakery. Emma smiled, accepting the paper cup he offered. "He's getting braver. Yesterday he spooked at a leaf blowing across the yard. Today he's challenging toys to duels." Jack's visits had become a comfortable routine, something Emma found herself looking forward to each day. His steady presence and quiet strength had been a foundation she hadn't known she needed until Bella's death had shaken everything. "Doc Miller called," Jack said, sipping his coffee. She thinks it's time to introduce Storm to another horse, says it's crucial for his development to have equine companionship, learn proper horse behavior. Emma nodded slowly. She'd been expecting this recommendation but dreaded it nonetheless. Who did she have in mind? Sarah's old mare, Willow. 23 years old, gentle as they come, experienced with foals. Jack watched Emma's reaction carefully. She's small, won't intimidate him, and she's been around long enough to teach him manners without being rough. The suggestion made sense. Willow was a kind-hearted pony who had taught countless children to ride over the years. Now semi-retired, she spent her days dozing in the sun and occasionally giving rides to the youngest Henderson children. "When?" Emma asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "Tomorrow, if you're ready. We can set up the paddock today. Make sure it's secure. Take it slow. Introduce them gradually." Emma looked down at Storm, who had abandoned the ball and was now investigating the pocket of her jacket, hoping for treats. She'd known this moment would come. Storm couldn't grow up isolated from his own kind, but some irrational part of her feared that with exposure to other horses, he might need her less. The thought squeezed her heart. "It's the right thing for him," Jack said gently, reading her hesitation. "And you'll still be his person, Emma. That won't change." Before Emma could respond, Maya Wilson's truck rumbled up the driveway. Maya wasn't scheduled for feeding duty today, which meant something was up. Emma and Jack exchanged glances before heading outside to meet her. Maya stepped out of her truck with a troubled expression. "Morning, Emma, Jack. Sorry to drop by unannounced, but I thought you should know." She handed Emma a copy of the Meadowbrook Gazette, the weekly local newspaper. Page 3. Emma unfolded the paper, Jack looking over her shoulder. There, under the headline, "Storm of Hope, Miracle Foal Unites Community," was a half-page article about Storm, complete with a photo someone had taken of the foal nuzzling Emma's shoulder. The piece detailed Bella's tragic death, Storm's against all odds survival, and the town's response. "I don't understand," Emma said, looking up at Maya. "What's the problem?" Maya grimaced. "Keep reading. Last paragraph." Emma's eyes scanned down the page until she reached it. The inspirational story has caught attention beyond Meadowbrook, including that of renowned horse breeder Maxwell Reynolds, who expressed interest in acquiring the foal for his championship bloodline program. Maxwell Reynolds? Emma's voice rose in disbelief. How does he even know about Storm? Maxwell Reynolds owned Silvercrest Stables, the largest equestrian operation in the state. His horses competed internationally, winning prestigious events and commanding extraordinary prices. His methods, however, were controversial, focusing on results above all else, with little regard for the individual animal's welfare. "Article says he's an old friend of the newspaper editor," Jack said, his expression darkening. "Must have seen the story and made some calls." "But Storm isn't for sale," Emma protested. "He's just a baby. He needs stability, care, time to grow up without pressure." Maya nodded sympathetically. "I know that, and you know that. But Reynolds doesn't take no for an answer easily. Word at the feed store is he's offering serious money." Emma handed the newspaper back to Maya, her hands shaking slightly. "I don't care if he's offering all the money in the world. Storm stays here." "You might want to prepare yourself," Maya warned. "Reynolds has a reputation for getting what he wants, one way or another." As if sensing the tension, Storm nickered from inside the stable. The sound, so innocent and trusting, strengthened Emma's resolve. "He can try," she said, her voice steadier now. "But that foal has already survived the impossible once. We won't let him down now." After Maya left, Emma and Jack spent the morning preparing the paddock for Storm's introduction to Willow the next day. They checked the fencing, removed any hazards, and created a safe space where the young foal could interact with the older mare while still having room to retreat if overwhelmed. Throughout their work, the newspaper article nagged at Emma. She'd heard stories about Maxwell Reynolds, how he pushed young horses too hard, how animals that didn't meet his exacting standards disappeared from his program without explanation. The thought of Storm in such an environment made her physically ill. "You're quiet," Jack observed as they took a break, sitting on the top rail of the fence. "Just thinking about Reynolds," Emma admitted. "Why would he want Storm? Bella was a good mare with decent bloodlines, but nothing extraordinary by his standards." Jack shrugged. "Good publicity, maybe? Miracle Foal becomes champion, makes for a compelling story. Or maybe he genuinely sees potential. Storm's confirmation is excellent, even at this age." Emma watched Storm through the stable door, where he was currently testing his speed in circles around his stall, his movements becoming more coordinated each day. There was something special about him, something beyond his physical attributes. A spirit, a will to thrive despite everything. "Whatever his reasons," Emma said finally, "Reynolds will have to find another horse. Storm belongs here." Jack nodded, his shoulder brushing against hers in silent support. "The whole town will stand behind you on this, Emma. You're not alone." As they returned to work, Emma felt a curious mix of dread and determination settling in her chest. Storm had already faced one impossible night and survived. Together, they would weather whatever storm came next, whether it arrived in the form of a wealthy breeder or the countless other challenges facing an orphaned foal and the woman who had pledged to protect him. In the stable, Storm finally tired of his galloping game and settled down beside his stuffed horse companion, unaware that his young life had already touched so many and was about to become the center of a struggle that would test the bonds of an entire community. The morning of Storm's introduction to Willow dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself had decided to provide perfect conditions for the important meeting. Emma had barely slept, her mind cycling through all the potential problems. Storm might panic, Willow might reject him, the trauma of losing his mother might resurface. By sunrise, she was already in the stable, checking and rechecking the paddock setup, while Storm watched curiously from his stall. "Everything's ready," Jack announced, arriving with Sarah beside him. She led Willow, a dappled gray mare whose gentle eyes and relaxed demeanor immediately filled the stable with a sense of calm. Despite her advanced age, Willow carried herself with quiet dignity, her ears pricked forward with interest as she caught Storm's scent. Dr. Miller arrived shortly after, clipboard in hand. "Remember," she cautioned as they prepared for the introduction, "this is just day one. Don't expect immediate bonding. We're looking for tolerance, not adoption." Emma nodded, though secretly she hoped for more. Storm needed a mentor, not just a companion. He needed someone to teach him how to be a horse, something humans, for all their good intentions, could never fully provide. They led Willow to one side of the divided paddock, allowing Storm to see and smell her through the fence. The foal's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He whinnied urgently, pressing against the fence that separated them, his entire body vibrating with excitement. "He recognizes her as a horse," Dr. Miller explained, watching Storm's behavior closely. "It's instinctual. He knows she's like him, not like us." Willow's response was measured. She approached the fence calmly, stretching her neck to sniff the eager foal. Her ears remained forward, a good sign. When Storm became too excited, dancing and bucking in his enthusiasm, she simply stepped back, watching with what almost looked like grandmotherly patience. "She's perfect," Sarah said softly. "She's establishing boundaries already, showing him how to behave." After 30 minutes of this supervised interaction through the fence, Dr. Miller gave the nod to move to the next phase. Jack and Sarah led Willow into the larger section of the paddock, while Emma brought Storm into the same space, keeping him on a lead rope for initial control. Storm strained toward Willow immediately, but Emma held him back, forcing him to approach more slowly. When they were within a few feet of each other, She gave him enough slack to move forward on his own. The moment was breathtaking. Storm stretched his neck, nostrils flaring as he took in Willow's scent. The older mare stood perfectly still, allowing his investigation. When he pressed too close, she shifted slightly, a subtle correction that Storm immediately responded to by backing up a step. The communication between them was silent but profound. "She's speaking his language," Jack observed. "Something we could never do, no matter how hard we tried." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She'd done everything she could for Storm, but watching him with Willow made her realize how much he'd been missing. The way he mirrored the mare's movements, the visible relaxation in his posture. It was as if some essential part of himself had finally clicked into place. After an hour of supervised interaction, during which Willow consistently demonstrated her trustworthiness with the foal, Dr. Miller declared the first session a success. "We'll keep them together for increasingly longer periods," she explained as they led the horses back to the stable. "Within a week or two, if all goes well, they can share a paddock full-time." Emma nodded, both relieved and slightly melancholy. Storm's growing independence was necessary and healthy, but it also signaled a shift in their relationship. He would always need her, but differently now. As they settled the horses into their stalls, the sound of an expensive engine drew their attention. Through the stable doors, Emma could see a sleek black SUV pulling up the driveway. "Expecting someone?" Jack asked, frowning. Before Emma could answer, Maxwell Reynolds himself emerged from the vehicle. Even from a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable. Tall, impeccably dressed in riding clothes, despite the fact he clearly hadn't come to ride, his silver hair perfectly styled. He surveyed the modest farm with barely concealed judgment before striding toward the stable. "Ms. Harrison," he called out, his voice cultured and confident. "I believe we have business to discuss." Emma stepped outside to meet him, consciously squaring her shoulders. Jack followed, positioning himself slightly behind her in silent support. "Mr. Reynolds," she acknowledged coolly. "I wasn't aware we had any business." Reynolds smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "I've come about the foal, of course. The miracle foal, as they're calling him. I'd like to make you an offer." "Storm isn't for sale," Emma replied immediately. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, clearly unused to such direct rejection. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," he suggested, glancing pointedly at Jack. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of my friends," Emma countered, "and my answer won't change. Storm was born here, and this is where he'll stay." "Ms. Harrison," Reynolds said, his tone shifting to one of practiced patience, "I understand your attachment to the animal. It's quite touching, but surely you must see that a foal with his potential deserves the best possible opportunities. At Silvercrest, he would have access to world-class training, nutrition, veterinary care. He has everything he needs right here," Emma interrupted. Reynolds' smile tightened. "Including a mother, other horses, a proper facility." He gestured around the modest stable. "I'm offering $20,000, Ms. Harrison. A generous sum for an unproven foal with no distinguished bloodlines." The amount momentarily stunned Emma into silence. $20,000 would solve many problems. The mortgage payments she'd been struggling with since her father's death, the repairs the farm desperately needed, the equipment upgrades she'd been postponing. Jack must have sensed her hesitation. He stepped forward, his voice level but firm. "Emma's already told you her decision, Mr. Reynolds. Storm isn't going anywhere." Reynolds' gaze shifted to Jack, assessing him coolly before dismissing him as unimportant. He turned back to Emma. "30,000 then. My final offer today. Though I should warn you, Ms. Harrison, I'm not accustomed to taking no for an answer." Something in his tone, the subtle threat beneath the polished exterior, crystallized Emma's resolve. "Then this will be a new experience for you," she said. The answer is no. Not for 30,000, not for any amount. Reynolds studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. When you reconsider, and you will, call me directly. No need to involve lawyers or agents. I can have the money wired to your account within the hour. He placed the card on a nearby feed bin, nodded curtly, and returned to his vehicle. As the SUV disappeared down the driveway, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You okay?" Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. Emma nodded slowly. "That was intense." "You stood your ground," Jack said, pride warming his tone. "Not many people say no to Maxwell Reynolds. He's not going to give up, is he?" Jack glanced in the direction the SUV had gone. "No, men like that don't accept defeat easily." Inside the stable, Storm nickered softly, drawing Emma's attention back to what mattered. She moved to his stall, where he greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded or the fact that his future had been the subject of negotiation. "Don't worry," she whispered, stroking his neck. "You're staying right here where you belong." But as she spoke the reassuring words, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Maxwell Reynolds's visit was only the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would require more than just her determination to win. Over the next week, Storm and Willow's relationship blossomed in ways that astonished even Dr. Miller. The older mare had taken to the orphaned foal with unexpected devotion, positioning herself between Storm and perceived threats, guiding him with gentle nudges when he misbehaved and standing patiently as he practiced grazing beside her, despite still being primarily bottle-fed. "It's remarkable," Dr. Miller commented as she observed them in the paddock. "Willow's exhibiting classic maternal behaviors even though she hasn't had a foal in over a decade. I've seen surrogate relationships before, but rarely this strong, this quickly." Emma watched from the fence as Storm pranced around Willow, all gangly legs and boundless energy. The older mare tracked his movements with attentive eyes, occasionally nickering softly when he strayed too far. When Storm raced back to her side, Willow would lower her head, allowing him to press against her neck in a gesture so reminiscent of a mother and foal that it brought tears to Emma's eyes. "He's getting what he needs," Emma said softly, a bittersweet mixture of joy and sadness washing over her. Storm was thriving, growing stronger and more confident each day, but his increasing attachment to Willow meant he needed Emma less. "He still adores you," Dr. Miller said, correctly reading Emma's expression. "This isn't replacement, it's addition. Horses are herd animals. They need multiple bonds to develop properly." Emma nodded, knowing the veterinarian was right. Still, something tightened in her chest when Storm didn't immediately run to greet her at feeding time anymore, too engrossed in following Willow's example of horse behavior. As she drove away, Dr. Miller rolled down her window. "By the way, Reynolds came by my office yesterday." Emma's stomach dropped. "What did he want?" "Information about Storm's health, development milestones. I told him patient confidentiality applies to animals too." She hesitated. "Emma, be careful. He was asking very specific questions, the kind of questions someone asks when they're building a case." "A case for what?" "I'm not sure. Just watch your back." The warning lingered in Emma's mind as she went about her chores. 3 days had passed since Reynolds' visit, and while he hadn't returned, Emma sensed his presence everywhere, in the cars that sometimes slowed as they passed the farm, in the increased number of calls from interested buyers that Maya reported at the feed store, in the sudden appearance of a real estate agent inquiring whether Emma had considered selling Willow Creek Farm. That evening, as Emma sorted through the mail at her kitchen table, a formal-looking envelope caught her attention. Inside was a letter from the bank, a courtesy reminder that her mortgage payment was 15 days past due, with additional fees now applied. It wasn't the first such letter. The farm had been struggling financially since long before Bella's death. But Reynolds's offer of $30,000 now loomed larger in her mind, a temptation she fought to dismiss. Her phone rang, displaying Jack's number. "Just checking in," he said when she answered. "Everything okay over there?" "Fine," Emma replied automatically, then sighed. "Actually, not really. Just got another late notice from the bank." There was a pause. "Want me to come over?" Sarah made too much stew again. The thought of company, of not facing the mounting bills alone, was appealing. That would be nice. Jack arrived 30 minutes later with a container of hearty beef stew and news that made Emma's heart sink further. "Reynolds has been talking to people in town," he reported as they sat at her kitchen table, "offering finder's fees to anyone who can help facilitate the acquisition of the miracle foal." That's a direct quote from what he told Bill at the hardware store. Emma pushed her stew around with her spoon, appetite diminishing. "How much?" $5,000. The amount was staggering in a town where the median annual income hovered around $30,000. It was enough to tempt even good people during hard times. "Has anyone taken him up on it?" she asked quietly. Jack shook his head. "Not that I've heard. Most folks are pretty offended, actually. They see it as trying to buy their loyalty." Relief washed over Emma. Meadowbrook had always been a tight-knit community that valued integrity over profit. Still, Reynolds's persistence was unnerving. "I keep asking myself why he's so fixated on Storm," she said. "There are better-bred foals available, ones with championship bloodlines, proven genetic potential." Jack considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about bloodlines. Maybe it's about the story. Miracle foal overcomes tragedy to become champion. That's marketing gold." Emma nodded slowly. "And Reynolds is all about image. Which means he won't give up easily. Not when Storm represents something he can't buy elsewhere." After Jack left, Emma checked on the horses one last time before bed. Storm was curled up next to Willow in the larger stall they now shared, his small body rising and falling in peaceful sleep. The sight should have comforted her, but Dr. Miller's warning echoed in her mind. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Reconsider my offer. $50K. One time only. Missed R." Emma stared at the screen, shock mingling with outrage at Reynolds's tactics. $50,000 was life-changing money for her, enough to save the farm, pay off debts, and still have a cushion for emergencies. For a brief, weak moment, she allowed herself to imagine the relief such financial security would bring. Then she looked at Storm, innocent in his sleep, trusting that the world around him was safe and permanent. Selling him would be a betrayal of that trust, a prioritization of her needs over his welfare. She deleted the message without responding. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Willow Creek Farm. Mayor Thompson's silver sedan pulled into the driveway, followed by several cars Emma recognized as belonging to town council members. Apprehension crawled up her spine as she went out to meet them. "Emma," Mayor Thompson greeted her, his usual jovial manner subdued. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. We need to talk." "About what?" Emma asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "Maxwell Reynolds approached the council yesterday with a proposal," the mayor explained, uncomfortable but direct. "He wants to sponsor a Meadowbrook Equestrian Center, state-of-the-art facilities, training programs for local youth, jobs for the community. Says it could put our town on the map." "What does that have to do with me?" Emma asked, though the connection was obvious. "His condition is that Storm becomes the face of the center, the miracle foal as a symbol of Meadowbrook's resilience and future." The mayor shifted his weight. "It would mean selling him, Emma." "I see," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "And what did the council say?" "Nothing yet. We wanted to talk to you first. Understand your position." Emma looked at the group of town leaders gathered in her driveway. These were people she'd known her entire life, people who had brought food when her father died, who had volunteered to help with Storm, who had always valued community over commerce. Yet she could see the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of one person's attachment against potential prosperity for many. "My position hasn't changed," she said firmly. "Storm isn't for sale. Not to Reynolds, not to anyone." Mayor Thompson nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. "We thought that might be your answer. Just think about it, Emma. This could mean a lot for Meadowbrook. A lot of people are struggling." As they departed, Emma remained standing in the driveway, a cold realization settling over her. Reynolds had escalated the battle, moving it from a private negotiation to a community issue. He was trying to isolate her, to position her as standing in the way of progress and prosperity. And judging by the expressions she'd seen today, his strategy might be working. News of Reynolds' proposed equestrian center spread through Meadowbrook like wildfire. By afternoon, Emma's phone was buzzing constantly with messages, some offering support, others gently suggesting she reconsider, a few outright accusing her of selfishly blocking the town's opportunity for economic growth. The division forming in the once unified community felt like a physical pain, a fracture in something Emma had always considered solid and dependable. She was mucking out stalls when Maya arrived, face drawn with concern. "It's getting ugly at the feed store," Maya reported, leaning against the stable door. "Two farmers nearly came to blows this morning, one saying you're right to stand your ground, the other calling you stubborn and short-sighted." Emma continued working, the repetitive motion of shovel against bedding oddly soothing amid the chaos. "And what do you think, Maya?" "I think it's your decision and no one else's," Maya answered promptly. "But Emma, Reynolds is playing hardball. He's holding meetings at the community center tonight, invitation only, talking about job creation, tourism, scholarships for local kids. All contingent on getting Storm," Emma stated flatly. "Yes, and he's painting you as the only obstacle to Meadowbrook's bright future." Emma paused, resting her weight against the shovel. "He's trying to turn the town against me." "Some," Maya corrected. "Not all. A lot of people see exactly what he's doing and don't like it one bit." But as Maya departed, Emma wondered how long that support would last against the mounting pressure. Reynolds was offering a drowning town a lifeline, jobs, opportunity, recognition. All it would cost was one foal. To many, it must seem like a small price for collective prosperity. Storm and Willow watched her from their paddock, the young colt now mimicking the mare's grazing behavior despite still receiving milk replacer. His coat gleamed in the afternoon sun, his movements more confident each day. Watching him, Emma felt a fierce wave of protectiveness. It wasn't just about her attachment anymore. It was about principle, the belief that living beings weren't commodities to be traded, that Storm deserved stability and love, not a life as a marketing symbol. That evening, Jack arrived unannounced, his truck's familiar rumble a welcome sound after a day of increasing isolation. "Thought you might want company," he said simply, presenting her with a pizza box. "Half pepperoni, half mushroom. I remembered you like both." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, remembering her pizza preference amid everything else, brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, gesturing him inside. They ate at the kitchen table, the conversation deliberately steering clear of Reynolds and the town's growing discord. Instead, Jack told amusing stories about his misadventures trying to train his new sheepdog puppy, and Emma shared updates on Storm's latest developmental milestones. For a brief time, it felt almost normal. As they cleaned up, Jack finally broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "I went by the community center earlier. Reynolds had quite the presentation. Architectural renderings, economic projections, the works. He's promising 40 permanent jobs plus seasonal positions. Emma's hand stilled on the plate she was drying. Good jobs are hard to come by here. Yeah, that's why it's effective. Jack paused. He also announced he's doubling his offer for Storm. $100,000 with 10%, $10,000, going to the town for public improvements. The amount staggered Emma. 6 months ago, such an offer would have seemed like salvation, enough to secure Willow Creek Farm's future for years to come. Now it felt like a price tag on her integrity. It doesn't matter how high he goes, she said quietly. This isn't about money. Jack studied her for a long moment. I know. That's what makes you different from him. Reynolds sees Storm as an investment, an acquisition. You see him as family. Family. The word settled in Emma's chest with unexpected weight. Her parents were gone, no siblings, no children of her own. Her family had become the animals she cared for, the neighbors who supported her, the community that had always been there, until now. Jack moved closer, his voice softening. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. And you're not alone in this, Emma. Whatever happens. The sincerity in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence when everything else seemed to be shifting beneath her feet, it overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. Emma found herself stepping forward, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth of him, solid and real. When his arms came around her, it felt like coming home. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder, for believing in me, for staying. They remained that way, a moment of connection in the eye of a growing storm, until the sound of a car door slamming jolted them apart. Through the kitchen window, Emma saw Reynolds emerging from his SUV, accompanied by a woman in a business suit carrying a leather portfolio. This time, there was no pretense of politeness in his approach. His stride was purposeful, his expression determined. Stay here, Emma told Jack, squaring her shoulders before walking outside to meet the unwelcome visitors. Ms. Harrison, Reynolds began without preamble. This is Charlotte Winters, my attorney. We've prepared a formal offer for the purchase of the foal known as Storm, along with additional considerations for the town of Meadowbrook. I've already declined your offer, Mr. Reynolds, Emma replied coldly. All of them. The attorney stepped forward, extending the portfolio. We strongly suggest you review the documents before making a final decision. Mr. Reynolds is prepared to be extremely generous. Emma didn't take the folder. My decision is final. Reynolds' polished facade cracked slightly, irritation flashing in his eyes. Ms. Harrison, I've been patient, I've been reasonable, but my patience has limits. The foal would have an extraordinary life at Silvercrest, the best care, the best training. You're being selfish, depriving him of opportunities you simply cannot provide. Storm isn't a product to be upgraded, Emma shot back. He's thriving here, with people who love him, with a surrogate mother who's teaching him to be a horse, not a trophy or a marketing tool. Reynolds' mouth tightened. I had hoped to resolve this amicably. Since you're being unreasonable, you leave me no choice but to pursue other options. Is that a threat? Jack asked, stepping outside to join Emma. Merely a statement of fact, Reynolds replied smoothly. Ms. Harrison, I'll give you until tomorrow to reconsider. After that, things may become uncomfortable. He nodded to his attorney, who placed the portfolio on a nearby bench before they both returned to the SUV. As they drove away, Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What did he mean by uncomfortable? She asked, her voice barely audible. Jack's expression was grim. I don't know, but I think we'd better be prepared for anything. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced the farmhouse, checking and rechecking windows and doors, before finally giving up and heading to the stable. Storm and Willow were sleeping peacefully, the foal tucked against the mare's side in complete trust. Emma settled on a hay bale outside their stall, drawing comfort from their quiet breathing. Whatever Reynolds had planned, whatever pressure the town might apply, she would protect Storm. She had to, because somewhere along the way, saving this orphaned foal had become about more than just one animal's welfare. It had become about standing firm in a world too willing to assign price tags to things that should be priceless. Emma woke with a start, disoriented by the early morning light filtering through the stable windows. She must have fallen asleep on the hay bale, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Storm and Willow were already awake, the foal nursing from his bottle while Maya, who must have arrived for the morning feeding shift, held it steady. "Morning, Sleeping Beauty," Maya said with forced cheerfulness. "Rough night?" Emma stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. "You could say that. Thanks for handling the feeding." "No problem." Maya hesitated, her expression turning serious. "Emma, have you seen the newspaper this morning?" Emma's stomach dropped. "No. What now?" Maya pulled a folded copy of the Meadowbrook Gazette from her back pocket and handed it over. The front page headline made Emma's blood run cold. "Local farm faces foreclosure. Willow Creek's financial troubles raise questions about animal welfare." The article detailed Emma's mortgage struggles, late payments, and sources close to the situation, questioning whether she had the financial stability to properly care for her animals, particularly Storm, described as a valuable young horse requiring specialized care. It stopped just short of directly suggesting she should sell the foal to Reynolds, but the implication was clear. "How did they get this information?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My financial situation is private." Maya looked uncomfortable. "Reynolds has connections at the bank. Nothing's really private in a town this size." The violation felt intimate and cruel, her struggles exposed for public consumption, twisted into a weapon against her. More disturbing was the suggestion that keeping Storm might be selfish if she couldn't provide adequately for him, a poison dart aimed at her deepest insecurity. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Emma said, the newspaper trembling slightly in her hands. "I'm afraid so." Maya placed a supportive hand on Emma's shoulder. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" What could she do? Reynolds had resources, influence, and apparently no ethical boundaries. Fighting him felt increasingly like trying to hold back the tide with her bare hands. Before Emma could respond, the sound of a truck rushing up the driveway caught their attention. Jack burst into the stable moments later, his face flushed with urgency. "Emma, we have a problem," he said breathlessly. "The bank called Sarah. They're moving up the foreclosure timeline. They're claiming some clause in your mortgage agreement about maintaining property value and saying the negative publicity constitutes a breach." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "They can't do that." "They're trying. Sarah's looking into legal options, but it doesn't look good. They could start proceedings as early as next week." The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. If she lost the farm, she'd lose everything, not just her home and livelihood, but Storm and all her animals. There would be nowhere for them to go, no safe haven she could provide. The careful balancing act she'd been maintaining for months was collapsing all at once. "This is Reynolds," she said, rage and desperation building in equal measure. "He's orchestrating all of it, the newspaper, the bank. He's trying to force my hand." Jack nodded grimly. "And it's working. The town meeting tonight, the one where they're voting on Reynolds's proposal, it's turned into a referendum on you, Emma. People are saying if you really cared about Storm, you'd either sell him to someone who can provide for him properly or accept Reynolds's offer for the good of the town." Emma leaned against the stall door, suddenly needing its support. The betrayal of neighbors she'd known all her life, people who had seen her grow up, who had stood beside her after her parents' deaths. It cut deeper than she'd imagined possible. "What do I do?" she asked, the question directed at no one in particular. "Fight," Maya said firmly. "Show up at that town meeting tonight and remind everyone who you really are, not what Reynolds is painting you to be." "And if that doesn't work?" Emma asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Reynolds' first visit. "If I lose the farm, what happens to Storm then?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications none of them wanted to face. In the silence, Storm nickered softly, abandoning his bottle to nudge Emma's hand with his velvety muzzle. The simple gesture of trust broke something inside her. Tears she'd been holding back for weeks spilled over, and once started, she couldn't stop them. Jack moved to her side immediately, pulling her into an embrace that asked nothing, only offered comfort. Maya quietly excused herself, giving them privacy as Emma's composure crumbled completely. "I can't lose him," Emma sobbed against Jack's shoulder. "I can't lose any of this. The farm, the animals, they're all I have left." "You haven't lost anything yet," Jack reminded her gently. "And you have more than you think. You have people who believe in you, who will stand with you." "It's not enough," she whispered. "Not against Reynolds and his money." Jack pulled back slightly, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Maybe not, but we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth. Reynolds wants Storm as a symbol, a marketing tool. He doesn't care about the foal himself, about what he needs or who he trusts. You do. That matters, Emma. It has to matter." As her tears subsided, Emma felt a strange calm settling over her. Jack was right. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about principles, about what kind of community Meadowbrook wanted to be, one that valued loyalty and compassion, or one that could be bought. "I'll go to the meeting," she decided. "I'll make them see what's really happening." Jack nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I'll be right there with you. So will others." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Emma worked with Maya to gather documentation. Storm's veterinary records showing his excellent care, proof of the volunteer schedule that ensured he was never neglected, photos of his bond with Willow. Jack reached out to those still firmly in Emma's corner, ensuring they would attend the meeting to counterbalance Reynolds' supporters. By evening, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the determined woman who stared back. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, practical but presentable, work boots exchanged for clean flats, her usual ponytail replaced by loose waves that softened her features, not trying to impress, but refusing to be dismissed. As she left the house, she stopped to check on Storm and Willow one last time. The foal was growing so quickly, his legs less spindly, his movements more coordinated. In the fading light, she could almost see the horse he would become. Strong, confident, beautiful. Not a trophy or an investment, but a living being with his own dignity and worth. "I'm fighting for you," she whispered, stroking his star-marked forehead. "For both of you." Jack waited by his truck, his usual flannel and jeans replaced by a button-down shirt and clean pants, his own version of battle armor. The sight of him, steady and reliable when everything else was in flux, gave Emma strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. Emma took a deep breath, looking back at the farm, her home, her heritage, her responsibility. Then she squared her shoulders and nodded. Ready. Whatever happened at the town meeting, she would face it standing tall. Reynolds might have money and influence, but Emma had truth on her side. And in Meadowbrook, that still counted for something, or at least it always had before. The Meadowbrook Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs that normally gathered dust in storage had been pressed into service, creating narrow aisles between rows of seats filled with familiar faces. The air conditioning struggled against the combined body heat, leaving the atmosphere uncomfortably warm and charged with tension. At the front of the room, Mayor Thompson and the town council members sat behind a long table, their expressions carefully neutral. Emma felt eyes tracking her as she and Jack made their way to the few remaining seats near the back. Some gazes were sympathetic, others accusatory, but most simply curious, waiting to see how the drama would unfold. Reynolds was already positioned near the front, immaculate in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most Meadowbrook residents earned in a month. He acknowledged Emma with a slight nod that managed to be both polite and triumphant. "Quite a turnout," Jack murmured as they sat down. "I don't think we've had this many people at a town meeting since the debate over the new stoplight." Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, outlining the agenda with practiced neutrality. "Tonight we'll be discussing Maxwell Reynolds' proposal for an equestrian center in Meadowbrook. Mr. Reynolds will present his plan, followed by community discussion and finally a non-binding vote to gauge town support." Reynolds took the floor with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention. A projector displayed glossy renderings of a state-of-the-art facility, training arenas, stables, viewing stands, even a small hotel for visitors. The proposed location was just outside town, on land currently occupied by several struggling farms whose owners Reynolds had apparently already approached about selling. "Meadowbrook has something special," Reynolds told the captivated audience, "a spirit of resilience, of overcoming challenges. That's what drew me here initially. The story of a foal born during a terrible storm, losing his mother, yet fighting to survive against the odds." Emma tensed as Storm's story became the centerpiece of Reynolds' pitch, twisted into a marketing narrative that barely resembled the raw, painful reality she had lived through. "This miracle foal represents everything the Meadowbrook Equestrian Center will stand for," Reynolds continued smoothly. "Determination, heart, community. As the center's mascot and flagship resident, Storm will inspire visitors from across the country. Meanwhile, Meadowbrook will benefit from job creation, tourism revenue, and national recognition." He detailed the economic projections: 40 permanent positions, seasonal employment opportunities, increased property values, and a scholarship program for local youth interested in equestrian careers. The numbers were impressive, the vision seductive in its promise of prosperity for a town that had seen little economic growth in decades. "Of course," Reynolds concluded, "this proposal hinges on Storm's participation. I've made extremely generous offers to Ms. Harrison, including profit-sharing arrangements that would secure her financial future while allowing the town to flourish. Unfortunately, she has rejected every attempt at reasonable negotiation." All eyes turned to Emma, the implicit question hanging in the air. Why would she deny the town this opportunity? Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Before we open to general discussion, perhaps Ms. Harrison would like to address the proposal directly?" Emma hadn't prepared a formal statement, trusting instead in her ability to speak honestly about what mattered. As she made her way to the front, legs unsteady with nervousness, she caught Jack's encouraging nod from the back row. Standing before her neighbors, people she'd known her entire life, Emma took a steadying breath. "I won't pretend I can match Mr. Reynolds' presentation," she began, her voice quiet but clear in the hushed room. "I don't have flashy renderings or economic projections. What I have is the truth about Storm, about what he needs, and about what's really happening here." She described the night of the storm, not the sanitized version Reynolds had presented, but the raw reality of Bella's suffering, the desperate fight to save the foal, the grief and exhaustion and determination that had defined those first crucial days. "Storm isn't a miracle because he survived against odds," she said. "He's a miracle because he taught all of us about community, about coming together when it matters. Maya organizing volunteer shifts, old Pete bringing a stuffed horse for comfort, the Mitchell boys handling night feedings, Jack," her voice caught briefly, being there every step of the way. That's the real miracle. Emma looked directly at Reynolds, her voice strengthening. Mr. Reynolds doesn't want Storm because of his bloodlines or training potential. He wants him because of the story, a story he had no part in, a story that belongs to Meadowbrook. He wants to buy it, package it, profit from it. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Emma continued. And when I wouldn't sell, he launched a campaign to force my hand, exposing my private financial struggles, pressuring the bank to accelerate foreclosure, turning neighbor against neighbor. Ask yourselves, is that the kind of business partner Meadowbrook wants? Someone who uses pressure tactics when he doesn't get his way? Reynolds stood, his polished facade cracking slightly. These are baseless accusations. I've simply made a business proposal beneficial to all parties. All parties except Storm, Emma countered. He's not a commodity, Mr. Reynolds. He's a living being who's already lost his mother. He needs stability, consistency, the surrogate mother who's adopted him. Moving him to Silvercrest would traumatize him, all so you can use his story to sell your brand. The room had grown perfectly still, the tension palpable as the two faced off. Then, from the middle of the audience, Maya stood. I'd like to speak, she said firmly. I've been part of Storm's care team since the beginning. What Emma's saying is absolutely true. Storm isn't just a cute story. He's a vulnerable foal who's finally thriving after a traumatic start. Separating him from Willow, from the environment he knows, would be cruel, no matter how fancy the new accommodations. Before Reynolds could respond, others began standing. The Mitchell twins, Old Pete, Sarah, Dr. Miller, each adding their voice to Emma's. They spoke of the foal's progress, the bond he shared with Willow, the community that had formed around his care. More surprising were those who stood to describe Reynolds' behind-the-scenes maneuvers, pressure applied to the bank, offers of finder's fees, subtle threats to businesses that supported Emma. As the testimonies mounted, Emma watched Reynolds' expression shift from confidence to concern. He hadn't expected this level of resistance, hadn't understood that Meadowbrook's loyalty couldn't be bought so easily. Finally, Bill Henderson, owner of the hardware store and one of the town's most respected voices, rose from his seat. The room quieted immediately. I've lived in Meadowbrook my entire life, he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. Seen good times and bad. This proposal sounds mighty attractive on paper. Jobs, opportunities, recognition, things we sorely need. If it were any other situation, I'd vote yes without hesitation. Reynolds smiled slightly, sensing support. But, Bill continued, there's something more important than economic opportunity. There's integrity. There's how we treat our neighbors when they're struggling. There's what we teach our children about standing firm when it's difficult. He turned to Emma. I've watched you fight for that foal, Emma. Watch this town come together around you both. That means something. It has to mean something. He faced the council table directly. I move that we reject Mr. Reynolds' proposal, not because we don't want progress, but because we won't sacrifice our values to get it. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and objections. Mayor Thompson called for order before announcing, "We'll now take a non-binding vote to gauge community sentiment. All those in favor of proceeding with negotiations for the Equestrian Center, please raise your hands." Emma held her breath as hands went up across the room, approximately 1/3 of those present. All those opposed? The remaining hands rose with conviction, a clear majority. The community's position is clear, Mayor Thompson announced. While we appreciate Mr. Reynolds' interest in Meadowbrook, we cannot move forward with the proposed Equestrian Center under the current terms. Reynolds' face hardened as he gathered his materials. You're making a mistake, he told the room coldly. One you'll regret when the next factory closes, when more young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. As he strode toward the exit, he paused beside Emma. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I still have leverage with the bank. You might have won tonight, but you can't save that farm without a miracle." Despite the threat, Emma felt only relief as neighbors surrounded her with congratulations and support. They had stood with her when it mattered most. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she wasn't alone. The morning after the town meeting, Emma sat at her kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, mortgage statements, past due notices, the foreclosure warning from the bank. The victory at the town hall had been exhilarating but temporary. Reynolds' parting threat echoed in her mind. "You might have won tonight, but you can't save that farm without a miracle." She needed more than community goodwill to keep Willow Creek Farm. She needed $30,000 by the end of the month to stop the foreclosure proceedings, money she simply didn't have. A soft knock at the door interrupted her calculations. Jack stood on the porch holding 2 cups of coffee from the diner. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her the larger cup. "Extra shot, touch of cinnamon, just how you like it." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, the familiar aroma momentarily lifting her spirits. "Thanks. I could use the caffeine." Jack glanced at the papers spread across the table. "Crunching numbers?" "Trying to." Emma sighed, gesturing for him to sit. "No matter how I arrange them, they don't add up to enough." "How bad?" "I need $30,000 by the end of the month or the bank starts foreclosure. Even if I sold every piece of equipment I own, I couldn't raise half that." She took a sip of coffee, the warmth doing little to dispel the cold dread in her stomach. Reynolds was right about one thing. I can't save the farm without a miracle. Jack was quiet for a moment, thoughtful rather than defeated. "What about a community fundraiser? After last night, you've got a lot of support." "Meadowbrook isn't exactly flush with cash," Emma reminded him. "Most people are struggling to make ends meet themselves. I can't ask them to bail me out." "You wouldn't be asking. They'd be offering." Jack leaned forward. "That's what last night was about, Emma. The town choosing what matters, choosing you and Storm over Reynolds' money." Before Emma could respond, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with the area code from the neighboring county. Frowning slightly, she answered. "Ms. Harrison, this is Daniel Cortez from Regional Tribune." The voice was professional, eager. "I'd like to do a feature story on you and the foal, the miracle foal that's captivated Meadowbrook. Our readers would love to hear about your stand against Silvercrest Stables." Emma's gaze met Jack's, surprise reflected in both their expressions. "How did you hear about that?" "News travels. Small-town David versus corporate Goliath makes for a compelling headline. Could we set up an interview? Maybe get some photos of the foal?" After arranging a time for the following day, Emma hung up, bewildered. "That was a reporter. He wants to do a story on Storm and the situation with Reynolds." Jack's eyes lit up. "That's it. Publicity. If Reynolds can use Storm's story, why can't we?" The idea took root, growing stronger throughout the day as more calls came in. First a local TV station, then a regional radio show, and by evening, a popular equestrian blog. Word had spread beyond Meadowbrook's borders, Storm's story resonating with people who appreciated both the foal's survival and Emma's principled stand. Maya arrived that afternoon, excitement radiating from her usually practical demeanor. "Have you seen social media? Save Storm is trending locally. People are sharing your story everywhere." She showed Emma her phone, posts from strangers expressing support, sharing the news article about the town meeting, criticizing Reynolds' tactics. The unexpected attention was overwhelming, but offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps public pressure could force the bank to reconsider the accelerated foreclosure. That hope gained momentum the next morning when the regional Tribune photographer captured images of Storm racing around the paddock, his movements increasingly coordinated and powerful. The foal had grown remarkably in the weeks since his birth, his coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright with intelligence and trust. Beside him, Willow maintained her watchful presence, the bond between them obvious to anyone who observed them together. "He's magnificent," the photographer commented, reviewing the shots on his camera. "You've done an amazing job with him." "Not just me," Emma corrected. "The whole town has been involved in his care." The reporter nodded, making notes. "That's what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about a foal or a farm. It's about a community coming together, standing up for something that matters." As he departed, promising the article would run in Sunday's edition, Emma felt a fragile hope building. Public opinion might not pay the mortgage, but it created possibilities that hadn't existed before. Those possibilities expanded exponentially when the story broke. What began as a local human interest piece spread rapidly across state lines, picked up by larger publications and shared widely on social media. Storm's journey from orphan foal to symbol of community resistance resonated with people far beyond Meadowbrook's borders. By week's end, Emma's phone rang constantly with interview requests, messages of support, and most surprisingly, donations. It began with small amounts, $5 here, $20 there, sent through a hastily established online fundraising page Maya had created. Then larger contributions started appearing, some from equestrian groups, others from individuals touched by the story. Jack arrived one evening to find Emma staring at her laptop in disbelief. "What is it?" he asked, concerned by her stunned expression. "Someone just donated $5,000, she whispered. "Anonymous. The message just says, 'Stand your ground.'" The donation total had reached $15,000, halfway to what she needed to stop the foreclosure. It seemed impossible, a wave of generosity from strangers moved by Storm's story and Emma's determination to keep him safe. "This might actually work," Jack said, the hope in his voice matching her own growing optimism. Later that night, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the paddock where Storm and Willow grazed peacefully, Emma felt something shift between them. The partnership forged through crisis had deepened into something neither had acknowledged directly. "Why did you stay?" she asked quietly. "Through all of this. You could have walked away, let me handle it alone." Jack was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening landscape. "I couldn't," he said finally. "You in this place. It matters to me. You matter to me, Emma." The simple honesty of his words washed over her like a warm current. Emma reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with a rightness that required no explanation. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "Even if we raise enough to stop the foreclosure, the farm will still be struggling. There are no guarantees." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "There never are. That's why you take the chance anyway." As darkness settled over Willow Creek Farm, Emma allowed herself to believe in possibilities, not just for the farm's survival, but for everything that might come after. Storm had brought unexpected blessings into her life, connections that transcended his role as simply another animal in her care. Through him, she'd rediscovered the strength of community, the power of standing firm for what matters, and perhaps most surprisingly, the courage to open her heart when she'd thought it permanently closed. The path forward remained uncertain. The fundraiser had gained momentum, but still fell short of what she needed. Reynolds hadn't reappeared, but his influence with the bank remained a threat. Yet for the first time since the storm that had changed everything, Emma felt a peace that went beyond circumstances, a certainty that whatever came next, she would face it surrounded by people who believed in her fight. Storm's soft nickering drifted through the evening air. a reminder of why that fight mattered, not just for a farm or a foal, but for the principle that some things should remain beyond the reach of money and power. Some things were simply worth standing for, whatever the cost. 3 days before the bank's deadline, the fundraiser reached $25,000, still short of what Emma needed but close enough to fuel hope. Storm's story had touched people across the country, drawing support from unexpected quarters. Children donated allowance money. Equestrian clubs held emergency fundraisers. A popular country singer shared the campaign with her millions of followers. Still, as Emma refreshed the fundraising page for the 100th time that morning, the gap between current donations and the amount needed loomed large. $5,000 might as well have been $5 million when time was running out. Jack arrived with breakfast, having taken to bringing food when he knew Emma was too preoccupied to cook. "Any change?" he asked, setting down a bag from the diner. "We're stalled at 25, Emma answered, closing her laptop with a sigh. "People have been incredibly generous, but I don't think we'll make it in time." "What about a bank extension? With this much public support?" "Already tried. They won't budge." Emma picked at the breakfast sandwich Jack had brought but couldn't summon an appetite. "I'm starting to think about contingency plans, where Storm and Willow can go if we lose the farm, what to do with the equipment." Jack's expression tightened. "Let's not give up just yet. We still have 3 days." Emma nodded, trying to match his optimism despite the dread settling in her stomach. Reynolds had gone quiet since the town meeting, but his influence lingered like a shadow. She suspected his hand in the bank's inflexibility, though she couldn't prove it. After breakfast, Emma headed to the stable for Storm's morning routine. The foal's development continued to amaze her, his gangly legs now coordinated and strong, his curiosity and intelligence evident in everything he did. At nearly 8 weeks old, he was transforming from the fragile newborn she'd cradled during the storm into a confident young horse with his own distinct personality. "Morning, handsome," she greeted him, smiling as Storm immediately approached the stall door, nickering softly in recognition. Behind him, Willow watched with her usual calm attentiveness, the surrogate mother who had filled a crucial void in the foal's life. As Emma worked through the morning chores, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway, Maya's feed store delivery vehicle. But instead of Maya at the wheel, her teenage son Eli jumped out, grinning widely as he approached the stable. "Special delivery, Ms. Harrison," he announced, handing her an envelope. "Mom said to bring this straight to you." Puzzled, Emma opened it to find a bank check for exactly $5,000, the exact amount needed to reach her goal. "What is this?" she asked, stunned. "Where did this come from?" Eli shrugged, still smiling. "Mom just said to tell you it's from Meadowbrook. The whole town pitched in what they could. Mr. Sanders from the hardware store, the Mitchell family, even Mrs. Rogers who runs the diner. Everyone gave something." Emma stared at the check, her vision blurring with tears. After everything, after standing against Reynolds, after refusing to sell Storm for $100,000, her neighbors had come together to save her farm with whatever they could spare. Not because it benefited them financially, but because they believed in what she was fighting for. "Tell your mom. Tell everyone. Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. I don't even have words." As Eli departed, Emma clutched the check, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. With this final contribution, she had exactly enough to stop the foreclosure. Willow Creek Farm would survive. She was still standing there, check in hand, when Jack returned from checking on his own property. One look at her face told him something had changed. "Emma, what happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the check, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes. "The town," she explained, finding her voice. "They pooled what they had. $5,000, Jack. Exactly what we needed. His smile was radiant as he pulled her into an embrace. I told you, you're not alone in this. Not anymore. The trip to the bank that afternoon was triumphant. Emma presented the full $30,000 with quiet dignity, accepting the loan officer's congratulations with the knowledge that the victory belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had contributed, from the anonymous $5,000 donor to the children who had sent dollar bills with crayon drawings of Storm. When she returned to the farm, she found a small crowd gathered. Maya, the Mitchell twins, Old Pete, Dr. Miller, Sarah, and many others who had been part of Storm's journey. They stood by the paddock watching as the foal pranced around Willow, his movements growing more graceful and assured each day. "Surprise," Maya called as Emma approached. "We thought a little celebration was in order." Sarah stepped forward with a cake decorated with a childish but recognizable rendering of Storm. "The farm is safe?" she asked, though the answer was clear from Emma's expression. "It's safe," Emma confirmed, her heart full to bursting. "Because of all of you." The impromptu party lasted into the evening. Neighbors who had become something more, a chosen family united by their commitment to a foal born during a storm, and the woman who had refused to give up on him. As twilight settled over the farm, someone produced a guitar, and soft music mingled with conversation and laughter. Emma found herself sitting on the paddock fence beside Jack, watching as Storm explored his expanding world, Willow never far from his side. "He's going to be something special," Jack observed. "Not because of Reynolds or publicity or any of that. Because of you. Because you fought for him when it would have been easier to give in." Emma leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the closeness they now shared. "Not just me. All of us." 3 months after the storm that had changed everything, as summer warmth gave way to early autumn crispness, Emma received a letter from Silvercrest Stables. Maxwell Reynolds was selling the operation, moving his business interests overseas following a series of public relations disasters, including, notably, his failed attempt to acquire the miracle foal against community wishes. The story had spread far beyond Meadowbrook, damaging his reputation in equestrian circles where public sentiment had shifted toward compassionate training methods and ethical treatment. "Looks like you won after all," Jack said when she showed him the letter. Emma shook her head. "We won. The whole town." That evening, as golden sunset light bathed Willow Creek Farm, Emma stood in the paddock with Storm. Now able to gallop with impressive speed and agility, he circled her playfully before stopping to nuzzle her shoulder, a gesture of affection and trust that never failed to touch her heart. Willow grazed nearby, her maternal instincts still evident in the way she monitored the foal's activity, though she now allowed him more independence. Their bond remained strong, a relationship that had healed them both, Willow finding renewed purpose in motherhood, Storm receiving the guidance only another horse could provide. From the farmhouse porch, Jack watched Emma with the horses, a contented smile playing at his lips. What had begun in crisis had transformed into something beautiful, not just Storm's journey from orphaned foal to thriving young horse, but Emma's journey from isolated struggle to embraced community member, and Meadowbrook's journey from divided town to united front. As dusk deepened into evening, Emma joined Jack on the porch, their hands finding each other with familiar ease. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about what comes next." "And what's that?" Storm's story touched so many people. Maybe this farm could be more than just a place for horses. Maybe it could be a rescue center, a place where other animals get second chances. Jack nodded, the idea resonating with what they'd experienced. Willow Creek Rescue. I like the sound of that. Emma smiled, envisioning the possibilities. The challenges ahead, certainly, but also the opportunity to extend the miracle that had begun with one foal on one stormy night. In the paddock, Storm reared playfully in the fading light, silhouetted against the sunset. No longer just a survivor, but a symbol of what could happen when a community chose compassion over profit, principles over expediency, love over fear. And that, Emma realized, was the greatest miracle of all.